Hello and welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the first episode in my series on the world of Cyberpunk 2077, the next big game coming from CDPR, the team that were behind The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. Now, a quick disclaimer because I have to explain something before I start the video. All this information comes from a certain source book that someone very kindly gave to me and asked me if I'd like to use it to make lore videos on Cyberpunk. Because if you don't know already, CDPR's newest game is based off of a previous universe that has already been built upon by some other individuals. A name that comes to mind immediately is Mike Pondsmith, and he is one of the creators behind the tabletop RPG, which is where all of this information comes from. Also, keep in mind that this information comes from sources that were written well before the game even began production, meaning that they might change one thing or they might even change everything when the game releases. But the information of the sources takes place in 2020, whereas the game takes place in 2077, so I imagine they will just build off of the material that already exists and then evolve it and change it depending on what they want to create in between the years inside of the universe. So we're starting with a brief history of Night City, the main place in which the game will unravel and that you'll get to explore. I've divided the video into 4 chapters and they basically summarise the important highlights of what you should know in order to have a comprehensive understanding of the entire city. So there was this man named Richard Alex Knight. He was rich, owning his own company, Knight International, and his biggest dream was to build a city of wonder filled with the most advanced technology. It would be free of poverty and crime and would be its own utopia. At the time of wanting to make this dream a reality, the world and society was collapsing around him. Main governments could barely keep civil control, and hence why many mega corporations wanted to build their own urban areas. These areas or cities would be free from government control and would technically be a free city state, meaning they had their own laws, their own infrastructure, and would be free of debt and would be entirely independent. This would allow the owning companies to grow and expand as much as they wanted without government intervention. Mr. Knight, being a very well-respected man and entrepreneur, began putting together the idea for his own megacity. He drew up a deal with various other companies and his business partners where he would supply the plans and oversee the city's constructions, and they would supply the cash. With the deal agreed, construction began, being built on top of an older city, leading to there being 2 main areas, the Old Town and the central corporate nexus, which was basically the fancy part. The building of the city went smoothly at first, but soon many of the backers who helped to fund the construction dropped out of the deal. That also included Mr. Knight's business partners as well. As to why this happened, it is stated that Mr. Knight employed a large number of innovative building techniques, which led to these old boy companies being excluded for various reasons. After which, since they were short on cash, they joined up with the local mob who were dominating the local area. That led to threats being made on Mr. Knight's life by the mob and his old business partners. As to their exact motivations for doing so, I can only imagine it was out of anger and a want to take control of the city for themselves and have it go in the direction that they want. After numerous threats and attempts on Mr. Knight's life, he was sadly murdered in his penthouse by an unknown killer, who was never caught, leading to the council of the city taking control in absence of a leader and naming the city itself after him, hence why Night City is known as Night City. What followed over the next 7 years was a battle for power over the city itself. The corporations that had funded Mr. Knight's visions to the bitter end stayed in control of its government and the new corporate centre, or otherwise known as the New Town. The mob, however, and its various corporate sponsors controlled many of the small businesses and dominated their way into controlling the old part of the city. Any official police forces could hardly do anything to stop this due to them grovelling to both corporate interests and mob interests, one flashing their paycheck and the other their lives. The following years after that led to the mob being uncontrolled entirely and taking rule of the city. Any corporations that still remained stayed in their penthouses and their plaza, which had become their safe haven. They had little interest in ruling the city or supplying any money to the civic government in order to allow them to do anything, leading to gang activity reaching its peak, everything from murders to mass killings being usual inside of what had become a hellhole. The various gangs ruled with an iron fist and did to the city and its people whatever they wanted. After many years of what was basically street warfare, the corporations finally made a move to deal with the mob, leading to what is known as the Mob War. They sent into the city armed forces to fight them using military assets, assault vehicles, fan tanks, bombings, assassinations, and outright warfare in the streets. Although you have to realize that the corporations didn't do this out of human kindness, decency, or compassion, it was strictly business. The mob was hurting their agenda, so they dealt with them using fire against fire. The mob was nearly completely destroyed due to the sudden counterattack, leading to them settling in the outer areas, being quieter and more careful. They still existed, but were far less violent and prominent. Meaning the civic government regained control of the city, but the corporations placed a dummy mayor in charge, meaning that they still pulled all the strings, after which they went about beginning to clean up the city and working on reconstruction. After many years, Night City finally became close to what Mr. Knight had envisioned long ago. Despite its violent birth into the world, it grew into a massive and flourishing place, the gangs being kept under control, and the main central hub of the city is stated to always be beautiful. Although it must be said that, like most of the country, Night City had devolved into being an armed society, people carrying guns being a very common thing to see, and the scars of the city's dangerous past still lurking amidst the flashiness of what was new. There will always be a new gang wanting to take back control no matter what the cost, and the hatred between the rich and the poor continues on inevitably, creating a society and a way of living that was far from what Mr. Knight actually wanted, but still a place that generally works and is better than many other places that existed at that time. So there you have it, a very brief summary of Night City's history. I left out a lot of details because it just kind of bloats up the video and makes it too long and impossible to understand without any context. I'll continue the series as time goes on depending on how well this video does, but otherwise if you enjoyed the video please drop a like or support me on Patreon if you want to see my channel continue, and stay subscribed for more. Until the next one, this has been OKGov, you will go and have a fantastic day.